You felt it throughout the entire relationship. That constant push and pull. That quiet, exhausting sense that you were always the one who cared more, the one who reached first, the one who fought for closeness while they slowly drifted away. You sent the good morning texts they barely replied to. You planned the dates they arrived late for. You opened your heart while they stayed emotionally distant, always keeping one foot pointed toward the exit. And somehow, you kept telling yourself it was enough, that their tiny flashes of warmth made up for the long seasons of cold. But something inside you eventually cracked. Not in rage, not in bitterness. In a quiet, bone-deep tiredness. One day, without speeches or explanations, you stopped reaching out. You stopped chasing. You stopped trying to pull love from someone who kept their heart locked behind walls you could never scale. And now, inside the silence you created, something unexpected is unfolding. Something they never prepared for. Something their avoidant nervous system is finally being forced to face. If you've ever walked away from someone emotionally unavailable and wondered whether they even noticed, whether they even cared, stay with this. Because what you're about to understand will change what you believe about avoidant attachment and the quiet power of your absence. You've lived this cycle so many times you could predict it in your sleep. At the beginning they were present, sometimes even intense. They pursued you, showed interest, made you feel chosen. And just when you started to relax, just when trust began to feel safe, they disappeared. Not physically, but energetically. The messages got shorter, the calls became rare, the emotional openness faded like smoke, and you, with your anxious heart and your need for reassurance, started to panic. You reached out more. You asked if everything was okay. You tried to reconnect, to fix whatever invisible thing you believed you'd broken. But the more you leaned in, the further they leaned out. The more you asked for closeness, the more they demanded space. And every time you pulled back, every time you gave them the distance they said they needed, they returned warmer, softer, more present, just long enough for you to relax again. Then the cycle restarted. You blamed yourself 1,000 different ways. You wondered if you were too much, too needy, too emotional. You tried being cooler, quieter, more independent. But nothing ever truly worked because the problem was never you. It was their wiring, their nervous system, their deep, unconscious fear of intimacy disguised as a craving for independence. Here's what matters about avoidant attachment. It isn't a choice. It isn't cruelty. It isn't really about you at all. It's a survival response coded into their body long before you ever arrived. Somewhere in their early life, usually in childhood, they learned that emotional closeness was unsafe. Maybe their caregivers were inconsistent, dismissive, or emotionally unavailable. Maybe vulnerability was ignored or punished. They learned that needing someone meant getting hurt, so their brain built armor, a defense that equates intimacy with suffocation, connection with loss of self, vulnerability with danger. When someone gets too close, when the relationship starts feeling real, deep, permanent, their nervous system sounds an alarm and they retreat. They don't do this consciously. They truly feel overwhelmed. They honestly believe they need space. They think they're being responsible when they say they aren't ready or need to focus on themselves. Underneath the logic and excuses is a scared part of them that learned love always carries pain. So they keep you close enough to avoid loneliness, but far enough to avoid being truly seen. For a long time, you played your part in their pattern. You were the initiator, the bridge builder, the one trying to close the distance they kept creating. And your pursuit, painful as it was for you, served a purpose for them. It let them feel wanted without becoming vulnerable. It gave them connection without commitment. It allowed them to keep one foot out the door while knowing you'd still be there when they drifted back. Then you stopped. Not because you stopped caring, but because you realized you were loving someone who couldn't receive it. And in that moment of choosing yourself, something shifted, the pattern fractured. For the first time in your dynamic, they're meeting something their avoidance system has never had to confront: your absence. Real absence, not the temporary distance you used to create when you were hurt. Not the kind they knew would end when they breadcrumbed you back, but lasting absence. The kind that doesn't reply. The kind that doesn't light up when they suddenly reappear. The kind that has actually released them. What happens next follows a predictable emotional sequence. Understanding it explains why staying silent became the most powerful thing you ever did. At first, they feel relief. The pressure disappears. The demand for emotional closeness is gone. They can finally breathe without sensing someone wants something from them. They may even tell themselves they're better off, that your leaving proves they were right about needing solitude. This phase can last days, sometimes weeks. And if you're watching from far away, it's the part that hurts most, because it looks like you were easy to forget. But that relief is defense, not truth. It's their nervous system numbing before the pain arrives, and the pain always comes. What they don't realize yet is that their attachment system was built around having someone pursue them, someone to push against, someone proving they wouldn't disappear even when pushed away. You were their emotional anchor, and they didn't recognize it until the anchor vanished. After the relief fades, something uncomfortable creeps in. Restlessness, unease, a quiet ache they can't name. They begin to notice your absence in small, ordinary moments, when something funny happens and they instinctively reach for their phone, then remember you're gone. When a hard day hits and no one checks in the way you always did. When they open social media and see you continuing life without them in it. At first, they suppress it. They tell themselves it's nothing. They distract with work, friends, dating, noise, anything that keeps them from sitting in the feeling. But the discomfort grows because their nervous system is finally registering something it's avoided for years. Loss, not imagined loss, not hypothetical abandonment, real, tangible loss. Someone who loved them chose to walk away. This terrifies them because avoidant people aren't afraid of abandonment the way anxious people are. They're afraid of needing someone and not having them there. They're afraid of depending on someone who might leave, so they leave first. They create distance first. They protect themselves by never fully attaching. But you didn't leave the way they expected. You didn't leave with anger, desperation, or dramatic closure. You simply became unavailable. And now they're forced to feel the very thing they spent their life escaping. This is when you start to live in their mind. Not because you're doing anything, but because your absence creates a space their mind keeps trying to fill. They wonder what you're doing, who you're with, whether you've moved on, if you think about them, if you still miss them. They scroll old photos, they reread old messages, they replay moments they once took for granted. They remember the way you looked at them, the way you laughed, the way you showed up even when they withdrew, and for the first time, they see the relationship through the lens of loss. They start to romanticize what they were too afraid to fully live. They remember your warmth not as pressure, but as safety. The very thing they pushed away becomes the thing they crave. But here's the truth that matters most. This isn't love awakening, it's fear. Fear of being alone, fear of losing something they can't recover, fear of realizing they sabotaged someone who genuinely cared. Avoidant people don't suddenly become secure because you left. They don't magically heal old wounds. What happens is their defenses crack for a moment, and they finally feel the emptiness underneath the armor they built to survive. Eventually, the discomfort turns heavy and hard to ignore, and they begin thinking about reaching out. They draft messages they never send. They hover over your name in their contacts. They build detailed conversations in their mind about what they'd say, how they'd explain themselves, how they'd finally make you understand. But something always stops them. Sometimes it's pride. Sometimes it's fear of rejection. Sometimes it's the quiet awareness that they haven't truly changed and that contacting you would only restart the same painful loop. And in the rare moments when they do reach out, it's usually not because they've transformed, it's because they're uncomfortable and hoping you'll calm that discomfort the way you always did. They hope you'll make it easy. They hope you'll accept the breadcrumb and let them back in without requiring the real work of healing. This is exactly why your silence matters. Because if you answer, if you engage, if you give them the comfort they're searching for, you teach them that they can always disappear and you'll always be there. You teach them that your love has no edges, that they never have to truly face themselves or their patterns. But if you stay quiet, if you hold your ground, if you allow them to sit with the discomfort of their own choices, you give them the only chance they have to genuinely change. Your absence teaches what your presence never could. It teaches that actions carry consequences, that people don't wait forever, that love, no matter how patient, still has limits. It teaches them that their walls don't just block pain, they block connection too. It teaches them that the same defense they built to protect themselves is the very thing leaving them alone. For some avoidant people, this realization stays intellectual. They understand it in their head, but they're not ready to feel it in their body. They're not ready for therapy, for sitting with discomfort, for learning how to tolerate closeness without running. But for others, your silence becomes a catalyst. The moment they can no longer escape, the moment that forces them to look at their patterns and ask whether this is really how they want to live, whether they truly want to keep pushing away everyone who cares about them, whether they want to end up alone because they were too afraid to let someone in. Your silence holds up a mirror, and some of them, not all, but some, finally look. Here's the part you need to understand. Even if they realize what they lost, even if they come back with a sincere apology, even if they promise they've changed, you can never return to who you were inside that relationship, because you've changed too. You learned something powerful in your quiet. You learned that your worth isn't defined by someone else's ability to recognize it. You learned that love shouldn't feel like constantly proving your value. You learned that peace is better than passion when passion is paired with pain. You learned that you can survive without them. And once you truly absorb that, the dynamic can never be the same. If they return and you decide to give another chance, it only works if both sides have done the work. If they've faced their attachment wounds, if they've learned to sit with intimacy instead of escaping it, if they've learned to communicate instead of vanishing, and if you've learned to keep your boundaries, to stop abandoning yourself for connection, to know when to stay and when to walk away. But the old version of the relationship, the one where you chased and they ran, that version is gone, and it has to stay gone. What you did by walking away wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Necessary for your healing. Necessary for your growth. Necessary for them to have any chance at seeing themselves clearly. You gave them opportunities. You showed up. You communicated. You tried to meet them where they were, and they kept choosing their walls over your love, so you chose yourself. And in choosing yourself, you gave them the greatest lesson an avoidant person can receive. The natural consequence of emotional unavailability, the experience of being alone because they pushed someone away, the realization that their fear of closeness cost them the connection they secretly wanted. Most people don't give that gift. Most people keep chasing, keep explaining, keep hoping one more conversation will finally break through. But you stopped. And in stopping, you became unforgettable. Not because you were flawless, but because you were the one who loved them and then loved yourself more. You may wonder what happens to them after time passes, after the panic settles, after they stop expecting you to come back. The honest answer is that it depends. Some avoidants learn nothing. They move on to someone new and replay the same pattern. They tell themselves a story about how you weren't right for them anyway. They justify their behavior and keep blaming intimacy instead of facing their fear of it. But others carry you differently. You become the one that slipped away, the one they think about years later, the one they quietly compare every relationship to. They'll date other people and notice what's missing. They'll see when someone doesn't show up the way you did. They'll miss the steadiness they once took for granted. They'll realize too late that what they called neediness was actually devotion, that what they labeled pressure was really love. Some of them will finally do the work. They'll go to therapy. They'll read about attachment. They'll understand that their patterns aren't protecting them, they're isolating them. They'll learn how to sit with discomfort. They'll practice vulnerability. They'll slowly begin to believe that intimacy doesn't have to mean suffocation, and even if they heal, even if they become more secure, they'll remember you as the one who sparked that change, the one who loved them enough to walk away, the one who showed them that walls come with a price. You might be waiting for closure, waiting for them to reach out and admit what they lost, waiting for them to say they're sorry, that they finally understand, that they wish they had done things differently. But closure doesn't come from them. Closure comes from you deciding you don't need their validation to move forward. Closure comes from accepting that some people can't give you what you need, not because you aren't worthy, but because they aren't healed enough to offer it. Closure comes from realizing that their inability to love you openly was never a reflection of your value. It was a reflection of their wounds, and you are not responsible for fixing wounds you didn't create. The closure you're searching for lives in your silence, in your choice to stop waiting, in your decision to build a life that doesn't revolve around someone who couldn't decide whether to stay in it. That is closure. And it's stronger than any conversation you could ever have with them. While they're sitting with their discomfort, something beautiful is happening inside you. You're remembering who you were before you started shrinking to fit into their limited capacity for love. You're reconnecting with your worth. You're realizing that you don't need to convince anyone to choose you. You're learning that the right person won't make you feel like you're too much. You're building a life where you're not constantly anxious, not constantly guessing whether you're about to be left, not walking on emotional eggshells around someone's unavailability. You're finding peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't depend on someone else's mood, presence, or ability to show up. And one day, maybe months from now, maybe years, you'll notice something quietly powerful. You don't think about them anymore. You don't wonder what they're doing. You don't hope they'll reach out. You don't feel that familiar ache when something reminds you of them. You'll realize you've healed, you've moved forward, you've become someone who wouldn't even want that relationship back if it were offered, because you've felt what it's like to live without constant emotional survival mode, and you won't go back. Right now, in this moment, you hold the power. Not because you're trying to control them or manipulate the situation, but because you reclaimed yourself. You stopped handing your power to someone who didn't know how to carry it. You stopped making yourself small. You stopped abandoning yourself for crumbs of connection. And in that decision, in that radical act of self-respect, you became untouchable. They can't hurt you the same way anymore because you're no longer available to be hurt. They can't pull you back because you closed the door. They can't take you for granted because you removed yourself from the table. And whether they realize it now, years later, or never at all, they lost something rare when they lost you. They lost someone who saw past their walls and still chose love. Someone who tried to love them even through their fear. Someone who kept showing up with consistency even when it hurt. Someone who gave them chance after chance to choose love instead of avoidance. And they chose fear every single time, until the day you finally stopped asking them to choose at all. This is your moment of freedom. Not the kind of freedom that depends on them changing, apologizing, or suddenly seeing your worth, but the freedom that comes from no longer needing them to. The freedom that comes from knowing you truly did everything you could. The freedom that comes from walking away with your dignity still intact. The freedom that comes from choosing peace over chaos. The freedom that comes from finally putting yourself first. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to justify it. You don't need their permission or their understanding. You simply need to keep walking, keep building, keep healing. Keep becoming the version of you who will one day look back on this moment and feel grateful that you had the strength to let go, because the person you're becoming doesn't chase emotionally unavailable people. The person you're becoming knows their value. The person you're becoming chooses relationships where love doesn't have to be proven, where presence is steady, where vulnerability meets vulnerability, where you never have to beg someone to stay. And that person, that healed, grounded, powerful version of you, is worth every moment of this silence, worth every day you choose yourself, worth the discomfort of not knowing whether they'll ever understand what they lost, because you already understand what you gained. Yourself, your peace, your power, your future. And no avoidant person, no matter how deeply you once loved them, is worth giving that away. They will realize what they lost. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but one day, in a quiet moment, when they're alone again because they pushed someone else away, they'll think of you. They'll remember how you loved them, how you tried, how you stayed longer than you should have, how you walked away with grace instead of resentment. And they'll finally understand that the problem was never you. It was always them, their fear, their walls, their inability to let love in. And by then, you'll be so far gone, so healed, so whole, that their realization won't matter anymore, because you'll already be living a new story, one where you are the main character, one where you're loved the way you deserve, one where you never have to choose between your peace and someone else's presence. Your silence taught them a lesson, but it taught you something far more valuable. It taught you that you are enough, that you always were, and that the right kind of love will never make you question that. If you feel something shifting inside you right now, if you feel your power slowly returning, hold on to that. It's the part of you waking back up. It's the part of you that refuses to settle for half love anymore. It's the part of you that knows your future deserves more than emotional survival mode. Your journey of healing begins the moment you stop looking back, the moment you stop waiting for someone else to validate what you already are, the moment you decide that your life doesn't revolve around someone who couldn't decide whether to stay in it. And that moment is now.